Today, my boss made another excuse to scold me and put his hand on my waist. I put up with such harassment from the age of 12 to 24, but today I don't want to put up with it anymore. My name is Maud Watts, and I am a humble laundry worker. I have no voice in the factory, but fortunately my husband treats me quite well. I looked at the hand that was dangling in front of me and picked up the iron and slapped it hard. I felt much more relaxed as I listened to him scream. I walked away quickly, but didn't run away. I waited in silence for the sheriff to come and arrest me. The sheriff arrived, but offered me a deal first. He asked me to go undercover and help him monitor the actions of the Women's Suffrage League. But I didn't say yes, and I was going to tell the sheriff about my boss's crimes, but he interrupted me. He handed me a business card and warned me that I could be cannon fodder in a war that was sure to be lost. Indeed, it wasn't so long ago that the women's suffrage movement seemed so far away to me. I was barely scraping by on extra long hours and a meagre paycheck and had used up all my savings. The first time I saw a protest, it scared me instead. The crowd chanting slogans knocked me down, and I saw one of my co-workers from the factory. She came up to me after I got up and I practically ran away, seeing only the horror of the protest. When I got home, I couldn't help complaining to my husband, who gently comforted me and helped me medicate my injured hand. I don't feel like I have anything to do with these activities, and I even feel like I should stay away from these fights. The next day, I saw that co-worker again and found that she was being embarrassed by her boss for being late, and I still couldn't help helping her. The woman thanked me and invited me to their rally. I didn't give her a reply, but I realized that the trend of women's political participation seemed to be getting stronger. After work, I saw the congresswoman speaking at the door. She invited us women workers to attend the women's hearing to fight for women's rights to political participation and pay equality. The crowd gradually dispersed, and I left in silence. But the co-worker named Vio chased after me and asked if I would go to testify in court. I declined perfunctorily, but Vio had a firmer reason. She had 3 daughters, the oldest of whom was 12 years old, who had already joined her in the laundry factory, and she didn't want her daughters to make the same mistake. As I heard, suddenly those new ideas hit my brain: equal pay for equal work, women's rights, changing the law. But mentioned the congressman's wife's words to my husband, who still acted dismissive. But my heart, unable to restrain itself, began to wonder about these things and even longed for them a little. That day, I made it a point to take my son to Irene's drugstore, just in time for the rally, and there were signs of the Women's Suffrage Alliance all around. When I saw these, I couldn't help but be curious, so I approached one of the women and asked her if speaking out could really make a difference. I listened to her speak those words, but my heart was filled with questions and unease. It was here that I saw a familiar face. Her presence drew me in, and I didn't realize how hot my gaze was. But what really silenced me that day was when I saw the boss bullying Vio's daughter. And I panicked and turned to run away. Back at my workstation, I tried to calm myself down, but the boss stood there, poised, with a hint of derision at the corner of his mouth. Despair instantly gripped me. Like Vio's daughter, I grew up in this factory and watched the women around me get crushed and bullied until it was my turn. I used to think that this was the only path for us, but now, as I look at the girls who want to make a difference, as I see them standing up for their rights, I feel a sudden urge in my heart. I'm going to the hearing. My husband came over and confronted me, and I said perfunctorily that I was just going to the hearing. The next day, Vio came to me with a bruised face. She pleaded with me to attend the hearing for her and take her to speak. In her anticipation, it was all I could do to muster the courage to walk into that venue surrounded by high-ranking males. When they asked me about my experience, I finally slowly began to tell my story. I told them that I was born in this factory. The work in the factory was very heavy and our bodies were constantly being consumed. I thought that if women could also have the right to vote, the days might be different from before. Luckily, they didn't laugh at my naivety of the idea, but instead gave me encouragement with sincere expressions. The speeches ended successfully, and the next step was to wait for the outcome of the trial. And I even discussed with my husband that I was planning to take my son to the beach when the results came in. My husband interrupted me and told me I was being naive. But even so, I still wasn't devastated. Both Vio and Mrs. Edith said my speech was great, and I knew I wasn't wrong. The day the results were released, I changed into my best dress. The entrance to the house was surrounded by a crowd of women, carrying flags, singing songs, and gazing with the same anticipation at the doors before us, hoping that the news coming from within would give us the dignity we deserved. Soon, an official pushed his way out, stepped up on a raised platform, and announced that he had examined all the testimonies. The result was a no-go. Though I remembered the minister's promises, Edith had long since seen through hypocrisy and said coldly, "No one cares about the anger of us women." Guards came out of the back and began to drive us away. Then violence quickly erupted. The women who had shown up at the pharmacy were knocked down and roughly strapped into wagons. We were escorted away by a group of policemen in fear. The policemen who stood by, however, wore cold eyes, as if we were aliens in their eyes. At the police station, the MP was informed and rushed to bail out the MP's wife. For £12, he will release everyone. The councillor's wife pleads with him that all that money is hers, but she has no dominion over it. The councillor didn't oblige and dragged her away at a brisk pace. The prison was a cold place. They stripped us of all our clothes and wouldn't leave us with any dignity. I couldn't hold back my tears, and the experienced Edith consoled me, saying that it was all part of the rebellion. She and the other companions tried to calm the fear I felt when I first went to prison, but every day I lived in extreme terror, as if I would collapse at any moment. When we were finally released a week later, the Congresswoman came to greet us with flowers. It was the first time I had ever been in prison, and it became an honor. Yet, in spite of all this, there was only one thing on my mind: going home and seeing my son. I made a point of taking the medal off before entering, but I realized I couldn't open the door to my home. My husband violently dragged me into the house, his face full of anger, complaining about the trouble and gossip I had brought into the house. After the children were put to bed, my husband's tone calmed down a bit and he said he had been waiting for me to pray for him. I asked my husband, if we had a daughter, what kind of life would she have? Husband replied, the same as you, of course. My heart almost broke. After work, we ran without hesitation to the venue where the women had once again gathered to hear Mrs. Pankhurst, the leader of the union, speaks. Mrs. Pankhurst's speech gave us strength, so now all we can do is fight with all our might. The police have come after us. The women formed a solid wall, keeping Mrs. Pankhurst safe, doing their best to stall for time. This time, the police car took us back to our doorstep in order to let us be punished by public opinion. I saw my husband's face full of disappointment, and he asked me why I had taken this evil path again. He threw my clothes out like a madman, shut me out, and wouldn't even let me see my children. Vio helped me find an inn to stay in, saying that the union would pay for my expenses and that there were enough supplies for me. I still couldn't stop crying, and Vio comforted me with the words that sobered me to the core. Tears don't bring dignity, only resistance does. The police decided to use public opinion to control the situation, and in collaboration with the newspapers, they published the ugliest photos of all the participants. Thought I would compromise and surrender, but he didn't realize that it was this leaving that made me more determined. One day I secretly brought my son out to meet him, and when I sent him home, I happened to meet my husband. When he saw me, there was a twinkle of resentment and disappointment in his eyes. The look in his eyes made me see that his years of forbearance and tolerance for me had run out. When I got back to the inn, I took off my wedding ring, held a pen, and wrote a letter to the sheriff. It was the first time in this letter that I expressed so firmly my position. I braved the rain and teased my son outside the window. But even this bit of coziness was not left for us by my husband. On the streets of London, postboxes are detonated one by one, as if they were sparks of anger deep inside us. However, Vio, once the most flamboyant, objected. More and more people have been arrested lately, and her sentence is getting longer and longer, and she can't stand the pain. She was close to giving birth. I went back home. It was my son's birthday. When I pushed open the door, my husband looked strange. I had an uneasy feeling in my heart. I forced my way into the house, and the sight in front of me made me freeze. Across the street was a well-dressed couple, and the husband was actually planning to give his son up for adoption. I couldn't take it all in. I held my son tightly so that he would remember my name, my heart filled with endless sadness and loss. One late, silent night, we got moving. The villa in the suburbs was set on fire with explosives. At the time of the arrest, we remained calm and serene. That was the outcome we had expected. The sheriff met me again in the interrogation room. Unlike the previous tense atmosphere, this time I felt immensely calm. In jail, I didn't eat a single bite. In this way, we had to force the government to recognize us. The government couldn't let us have our way, and several men pushed food into my cell. They pressed me into a chair, milk was injected through the funnel into my windpipe, and the pain was unspeakable. I could barely breathe. The sheriff stood outside the door, watching all this, and he was suddenly shocked by the cruelty. This torture went on for a week, and finally we were released. Edith's husband arranged for me to be given a bunk in the church, and Vio brought me food. She was about to give birth.
The New York Times scholarship.
The violent impact had ruptured her skull. She languished in the hospital for 4 days and eventually passed away. Suddenly, I felt a great sense of absurdity. Why must we rely on sacrifice for justice? Is waiting and sacrifice what brings justice? I ran frantically to the laundry. There has never been a day when I was more awake than now. I found Vio's daughter and dragged her to Mrs. Congressman's house, where I begged her to hire Maggie as a maid. The Congresswoman agreed, and I watched as Maggie had a place to go and turned to leave. Here, it was much better than the laundry. That night, I lit a candle and took out the book that Emmeline had given me. During the night, in my dreams, I heard the names of many important women, names that had been passed down from generation to generation. The next day, Edith came to me with newspaper headlines, and almost every one of them told the story of Emmeline. The blood had awakened the fighting spirit of the women of Britain, and thousands of them decided to see her off. White lilies and cloth dresses decorated the headquarters of the Women's Suffrage League that day, until the crowds drifted away, and I was the last to walk out of the room. You see, thousands of people are following in your footsteps.